but the flying was so cool. It was so dynamic. We were more sideways and backwards than we were forward. And with two helicopters in a pattern, we were dropping we were dropping a pallet on the customer's deck every 30 seconds.
Welcome back, everybody. We're joined today by Walt Morgan. Walt is a former Navy helicopter pilot and a leadership coach. Walt, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for the show that you do. I enjoy your show. I think, well, it makes me think. So I'm delighted to be here and to be part of it. So thank you.
We're really glad to hear that. Anthony, how are you doing?
I'm doing good today. Thanks for joining us, Walt. Looking forward to diving in. I got to read your bio, and I thought this would be a lot of fun.
I think so. Thank you.
So I wanted to kind of start at the beginning here. It says that since you were 5, you wanted to fly helicopters. So how did you at 5 years old say that's what I want to do, and how did it progress from there?
I think it was the flavor of the moment. I was in kindergarten, and a shout out to my kindergarten teacher, Miss Burka, gave us the assignment to draw what we wanted to do when we grew up, and then she would help us write the words to that. So in that moment in kindergarten, age 5, I said, I want to be a helicopter pilot. So I drew a picture of a helicopter. There's some misspellings around the word. But I think what made it different, because I've wondered, because I also along the way wanted to be an astronomer. There's a couple of other things that appealed to me, but my mom framed that one. So it was captured. It was captured not just in my imagination, it was just captured. There was this image, this thing that felt like it manifested a destiny of sorts. And that picture still hangs on the wall of my childhood room on a ranch in Oregon. It's still there, right? So whatever came of that seemed to have manifested something in my life.
That's super cool.
Yeah, and I would say that there were temptations along the way to do something else. So as the story goes from there, I grew up in a small rural area of Oregon on a ranch. My dad was very, very hardworking, very, very productive. He was also a teacher. Both my parents were teachers, but we had this ranch. There's always a lot of work to be done. And I know so many people that fall in love with that kind of work, and I really, really admire that. I did not. I wanted to escape that kind of work. It wasn't quite right for me. So my form of escape was in the form of a Navy ROTC scholarship, which are these great scholarships. You could apply them pretty much anywhere in the United States that would accept you. So I ended up at the University of Colorado in Boulder, which is where I am right now, by the way, is in Boulder. Ended up at CU Boulder on this Navy scholarship, and I did my time in school, which was wonderful. By the way, we did win a national championship my freshman year here, so that was a long time ago. So if you want to wonder how old I am or when I was here at CU, you can do the math and track that backwards. But at the end of that, my obligation for the scholarship after the taxpayers graciously paid for my education. I didn't appreciate that fully at the time, but what a tremendous gift that was offered to me that I am very thankful for that changed the trajectory of my life. I was commissioned as an ensign in the United States Navy, and part of that is, well, what do you want to go do in the Navy? Now, the Navy will tell you. They'll ask you, right, what do you want to do? And they'll tell you, and hopefully there's some alignment. But I said I wanted to go to flight school, and they agreed that that would meet a need that the Navy had. So they sent me to flight school. The beginning of Navy flight training, we're all flying the same thing. We're all flying fixed wings, T-34 Charlies at the time. Now they fly T-6s. Um, they fly this aircraft, and then at the end of the first 8 months or so, then you're selected into these different aviation branches. Like if you're going to fly big props, or if you're going to fly jets or helicopters. Now, this should surprise every single member of your audience that not everybody wants to fly helicopters, right? Not everybody drew a picture when they were 5, it turns out. Like there seems to be a real draw for flying jets. And that's really what everybody's competing for. And it is competitive to get jets. I just happened to go through during this jet draft. Like they're trying to push as many people into jets as possible, as long as they had sufficient grades. I had sufficient grades. So the idea was is that they're going to push me into jets. And I actually had a moment around that time because I thought, well, maybe I will go be a jet pilot. Why not? But something told me I wasn't a jet pilot. Something told me I truly was a helicopter pilot. And I don't think I was even that connected to my 5-year-old self at that time. It was just me listening and understanding. So I requested to fly helicopters, and that created some concern. But we got through that, and I was allowed to fly helicopters, and I'm really grateful for that too, because that's absolutely where I belonged, what I should be doing, and a real passion around flying helicopters emerged from that.
That's really cool. Were there uh, any really challenging moments during your helicopter training that made you kind of think to yourself, "Why the heck am I doing this?"
Maybe early on, um, I don't think I've ever shared this story before, but you reminded me of it. So, like, I went to high school. Um, there's like 30 people in my graduating class. There wasn't really a value of going to college in this small rural Oregon town. Um, so it because education wasn't really a value, it wasn't difficult to graduate at the top of my class. All right. But in my mind, I was special. I was a hero. And then I got the scholarship, I go off to college. College is a lot more competitive. And now I'm also with my ROTC peers, and in a sense competing against them. And all of them were in the top 10% of their high school, and they were competitive. And then I got to flight school, and then that was bumped up yet another notch. Like suddenly things really are competitive. These are people that are accustomed to being at the top of everything, competing with one another. And and I certainly had that moment of what am I doing here? Like this, I don't think I belong here. And I remember when I first started flying the T-34, and this is in Corpus Christi, Texas. It's incredibly hot. It's October, which might as well be July on the sun. Like it's so hot there. And my goal after flying, because initially flying was very, very physically taxing on me, and and it was hot. So my goal was always to get like a shower in before I passed out after a flight from exhaustion. And I go back to my BOQ, which stands for Bachelor Officer Quarter Room, and and I wouldn't make it. I would just fall on my bed, just all sweaty and nasty and stinky in my flight suit, and I'd fall asleep. And that happened for the first 10 flights or so before I adapted physiologically, aeronautically, and then it was fine. It wasn't taxing after that. But I remember it's probably after my 7th flight, and and this is the part I've never shared in my life before, but like from the sweat and the stress and also my relative youth, I was still in, halfway through my 20s at that point. the largest zit imaginable formed somewhere between on the side of my nose, and and I just remember that as somehow being emblematic of what felt like too much, right? Like my body was resisting this, and I wasn't sure I was cut out for it. And I remember calling my best friend from college, and he's still my best friend now. And I'll be frank, he hasn't been particularly useful in my life. He's generally useless. But in this particular moment, my friend said, "What are you doing, man? Get a hold of yourself. You're fine. You're fine. So you're being a little bit challenged. This isn't a big deal. So you have a zit, like you'll probably recover from that, right? You're going to be okay." And knock it off. Like he didn't even give me the space to, he didn't even like, it was a very, now professionally as a leadership coach, like it was a very anti-coaching call, right? It was highly directive. Like, knock it off, quit your whining, go do what you have to do and finish this
Tough
thing.
love.
Yeah, it was. And again, I've never told that story before, but that was like probably um, the only real bump in flight school as far as like my commitment or feeling like I belonged. After that, it turned out actually to be probably a little bit too much fun. Is for a military environment, Naval Flight School is really, at least at the time, you study on your own, you show up when you're supposed to for your flight, as long as you perform on that flight, no questions asked. We'll see you the next time you're scheduled to fly. Like, where else in the military do you get that kind of freedom? So now think about these, like a bunch of early 20 knuckleheads that are just out of college now getting their first paycheck with that much freedom. So it was oddly an unexpectedly fun time of my life once I had that tough conversation.
So that just reminded me of a story. The only time I've ever been in a helicopter was in Florida, and we were doing so like going up and down the coast, the shoreline, and we were just kind of like seeing what was in the water. It was like a tour,
Hmm.
and it felt like I was on a roller coaster the whole time. And so when he said it, like, "Hey, this is too much fun," I immediately went back to like riding in a helicopter for me was like being on a roller coaster, and I had a blast. And you
Yeah.
got to like look down and see all the rays and stuff in the water. And so that just gave me a little bit of a flashback to some fun helicopter times.
I'm glad you had that experience. You get it. For me, like the world was my skateboard park when I was in the helicopter, right? Like terrain, everything. What a fun, playful way to be. And I do have, just in general, I think a playful way about me, which manifested, through me in flying. That's how I showed up. So I never got tired of it. Like it was, oh, I mean, yeah, there's scary moments and stressful moments, and if the ship is pitching and rolling at night, you've got to be on your game for sure. I'm not saying it's not challenging, it's not dangerous, it's not a lot of things. I lost some very good friends along the way, and it's really fun as you experienced.
What are some of like the coolest things that you can share that are like things you're particularly proud of that you got to do as part of your piloting?
Yeah, there's maybe the mission that I specialized in was not on the surface particularly cool, right? Like, yes, I got to do some stuff. I probably spent a couple hundred hours with SEALs in the back, mostly for training, but not always. Got to, I don't want, first off, I don't want to overstate um, the sacrifices I made through my service because eh, not all service members sacrifice the same way. And I don't, I deployed a number of times to combat zones, but to be actually in a kinetic combat environment is an entirely different thing. And I can't pretend that I have credible experience in that. So I want to be really upfront about that. And also, my service was something I very much enjoyed. If you didn't get that already, I really liked flying. I liked my job. So when people thank me for my service, I've overcome this now, but I used to feel a lot of shame around that. Like what exactly do they think that I did in my service that I should be thanked for, right? Like, because it wasn't that. I loved to deploy on ships. I loved to fly helicopters off of ships. I loved to go around and see the world and experience things. So I do want to qualify our conversation there. But I got to do this mission. I specialized in this mission. I was part of a team that specialized in this mission. And it is not sexy. Like I would never admit this to a fifth grader. Like if a fifth grader asked me what I did in the Navy, it would be like this like big tough cool tactical thing. But I'm going to tell you guys because there might be a lesson in here about what's really cool. Because I I used to love this thing called vert rep. And I do it several days a week, maybe sometimes even 5 or 6 days a week. And sometimes a lot of the time it was in the Persian Gulf where it was like 115 degrees, 120 on the flight deck, and just unbelievably humid. And really, what we were doing was using two helicopters, um, just moving pallets from one ship deck to another. So it might be moving pallets from a supply ship to the carrier, or from the supply ship to a cruiser or destroyer. Nothing particularly sexy about that on the surface, but the flying was so cool. It was so dynamic. We were more sideways and backwards than we were forward. And with two helicopters in a pattern, we were dropping we were dropping a pallet on the customer's deck every 30 seconds. Like that's how fast we're moving. Like we're tight, we're sideways, we're backwards, we're doing this thing called the side flare where you're just flying in at the ship hot and then the last second you kick it sideways and you hit a precise spot. It's cool. It's so much fun. So, I mean, that's something I'm proud of. The teamwork and the airmanship required to do that mission well, I think is pretty unparalleled. It is unparalleled in Navy helicopters. Like we were really, really good at what we did. And then when we worked with other helicopter crews that didn't do that, they couldn't do what we could do. And when the SEALs wanted to work with us, they're like, yeah, they would choose us. They're like, we want to work with you because of these particular set of flying skills that you've created from moving strawberries from one ship to another. But it creates this incredible flying skill set that can be applied to anything.
You said like, hey, maybe like, how did you phrase it? Like, you didn't feel like you did enough. But I bet you the people on those ships relied on that cargo, relied on those strawberries, and you're like making their lives better. So it really depends on how you think about it.
Oh yeah, well yeah. So if I've learned nothing else in 23 years of naval service, sailors love strawberries, or anything else that we brought over to them. There was also ice cream and bombs, right? Like if bombs somehow make it sexier, I moved a lot of bombs in my day,
Yeah.
um, but it's whatever needed to be moved. Yeah, no, it is an important cog, and that's actually very much how um, I thought of it. I remember when I was officer in charge of a helicopter detachment that did a lot of this. And this is really how we talked about it as a team. Like the carrier strike group has a job to do, and part of that's launching and recovering jets. It's doing a lot of other things. So the faster and more efficient we are as this tiny little cog in the system, the more they can focus on what they need to focus on and not worry about us. So when we started like working with this new strike group, they would set aside like 6 hours, we'll say, for a logistics mission that we were a critical part of. And but we would do it in 3 hours. And so then after a couple weeks, the window would start narrowing and narrowing and narrowing until after a month or two, they were just putting this tiny little dot of time on the air plan on the schedule, and for 6 months working with that strike group when I was officer in charge, we never once went over that window that was allotted to us. No matter, I remember once it got so impossibly so impossibly small. We got the team together. I'm like, I don't know how we're gonna do this. Like, this feels impossible. They trust us way too much on this one, but we always got it done in time. And to your point, that was a service, right? By We all play an important role in whatever team that we're on, and it might seem small and it might not be glamorous, but committing to do our job well in service to the bigger picture and to the other players on the team, to your point, does bring value. And strawberries are delicious.
You started that story out by saying that you thought there was sort of a lesson in there about, a different way to look at what's cool. Because what you were doing isn't the sexy thing. But the way I see this is you spent 23 years of your life doing the thing that you wanted to do since you were 5. Like, you were essentially living your dream. And I can't think of anything cooler than that, really. Like, that's what we all sort of want. So that is very cool.
That's so well said, because selecting helicopters over jets was right for me. There were some people for whom that would not have been right for, that they have to be on the very tip of the spear, and that's important to them. It wasn't important to me. And even in the helicopter community, right, being somebody who specializes in logistics might not be seen as the most cool thing, but to your point, it was the coolest thing. And being able to recognize that, look within, and recognize my truth and push out external forces, um, is something that I value about myself.
So let's talk a little bit now about your transition out of the Navy. So when you retired, it says here that you assumed you were going to fly helicopters in some fashion for the rest of your life, but it didn't turn out that way. So talk us through kind of that transition out of the Navy and what you're up to now.
Yeah, so the Navy did this really kind thing for me. Um, and it was, they sent me to the University of Colorado, which I mentioned earlier is my alma mater, to be a professor while I was still active duty and to be the executive officer and the commanding officer of the Naval ROTC unit. But that is dual hatted in this professorship. And so I came here to Boulder, and for the last 4 years of my active duty career, I was teaching leadership classes at the university. Now, going into that, I thought I had leadership pretty much figured out, right? I'd been designated a leader uh, um, throughout my entire career. I'd been given teams. We'd been successful as teams. I was pretty good at building relationships. I invested in people, and I thought I helped people grow, all these things. So I'm like, okay, I've got leadership figured out. So now I'm in the role as a leadership professor. And in my very first semester teaching, it occurs to me I have no idea what leadership is. It is such a deeply complex phenomenon that I didn't fully appreciate the leadership experiences I'd had, or even the complexity of the leadership context that surrounded me. I failed to recognize the real leaders on my teams, or identify their contributions, or really fully understand how it all connected. And so I became fascinated with the topic of leadership. And by the way, I'm no closer to understanding leadership now than I was 12 years ago when I was first appointed as a professor, through nearly, constant study and reflection. I will never fully understand this beautiful thing about people creating important impact through their own lives and through others' lives, right? It is a never-ending fascination for me. So over that 4 years, I became aware of my love for the study of leadership, but I also became aware of my love for serving others in their leadership journeys, just to meet them where they were without judgment and like say, hey, how can I help you grow in a way that's important to you? So when I did retire, after I'd been a professor for 4 years, I was again kind of at a crossroads, and there is a pretty clear path for a retiring Navy commander, and it goes to the airlines where a lot of my squadron mates are now, or it goes into defense consulting or defense contracting where a lot of my squadron mates are now. Um, and there's another path to go where nobody knows who you are or what you've done or your experience is. And I just felt again this nudge that told me you're supposed to do something in leadership development. I didn't know what it was, but I'm supposed to do something in leadership development. So I followed that nudge on LinkedIn. I wrote that I am a leadership development specialist. Done, right? Like for sure I'll get a job now because it's on LinkedIn. It took a little time before finding my first job after I retired. Um, and I'm glad it took a while because I, I landed in a place that was really important for my development. Landed in a Fortune 200 company called DaVita. They do dialysis. You might see some of the DaVita clinics around. But what made DaVita important for me was it was very, very intentional about culture. I like to say that the only organization that I've ever seen that's as intentional about culture as DaVita is the United States Marine Corps. Now, they have very different cultures, it turns out, but the intentionality around the creation of culture is very, very similar in how they tell stories and how they have myths and how they have symbols. It's very, very similar. It's very intentional, very smart. But in the case of DaVita, it's very emotionally forward also. It's very heart centric. So I got hired on by DaVita on their leadership development team called the Wisdom Team, which is just I think an amazing name too, because in most corporations it would be called learning and development. But learning and development's a very cognitive thing. Wisdom's a very embodied thing. So it was a very, very very smart nomenclature, in my opinion. Um, and so now I got to this place and I realized very, very quickly that I had been negligent in my own emotional development and my own spiritual development for decades. I was pretty good at thinking and doing, but I wasn't good at being and feeling and connecting, right? That was absent in my life. But very much the work I was doing at DaVita was about those things, but I hadn't figured them out yet. So in many cases, I was holding space for these really powerful, like 4 day programs. There'd be 40 people in the room, and we're doing this emotional work that I myself hadn't done yet at that time. And so I was going through this grinder while simultaneously holding space, and it was spitting me out the other side. And it was it was humbling, and it was often painful, and it was powerful. It was so many things. And that was probably my first year at DaVita. It was just me kind of getting my emotional and spiritual ass kicked right there in these programs and just trying to figure it out. Eventually I had worked through that those programs, but initially it was very jarring. So that ended up being a really, for me, very steep emotional and spiritual experience, which is really hard to have in a corporate environment. That's why I feel so lucky to have found that, and I'm so grateful for to them for taking a chance on me. Um, and part of my training there, nearly everybody on my team was a coach trained at Integral Coaching Canada, which is the integral coaching is a methodology, and it was pioneered at this place, Integral Coaching Canada. So I was the only coach on the team, or the only faculty team on the team that hadn't been up there. So eventually they sent me up to Canada to do my initial coaching certification. And when that happened, it was just boom, this is it. This is what that nudge from the universe was when I retired and said I'm supposed to go into something. And that whole path, while it wasn't always clear, was leading me to this integral coaching place. And as soon as I started that process, that training, that certification, I knew, like, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, this is it. This is the calling. So, got training, stuck around with DaVita for another year or so because I really felt indebted, and I hope for all the value that that experience provided for me. I also hope that I provided value for them. And then I hung out my shingle about 4.5 years ago and have been an independent leadership coach ever since then.
I'm trying to think of where to go with that one. There's a lot of good stuff in there. What do you think? What do you think makes? Did you call it integral coaching? Did I get that
Hmm.
right?
Yes,
What
integral
what
coaching.
makes what makes it different from what's commonly taught?
Yeah, so it has a lot of parallels to what's commonly taught in the sense that it is a program and a methodology that's International Coaching Federation accredited. So it does meet certain wickets that you'll see in other respected coaching programs and methodologies. But research has demonstrated that integral coaching offers the most complex view of the client. In other words, the lenses that we're using in integral coaching to understand another human being compassionately, not to put them in a box, but to really do our best to understand that human and hold it lightly is the most complex system of understanding. There's these all these different lenses that we use. Sometimes they're in conflict, sometimes they're complementary. It doesn't matter. It's a really powerful way to be with another person and to hear them, experience them, feel them, understand them. So that would be one thing. Its use on metaphors is absolutely brilliant. Um, and so powerful and so useful. Um, the part where it's so so uniquely tailored to any individual. It's never, for all my clients, I've never had two clients that like showed up the same way, and I've never had two clients that I used the same metaphors for. I've never had two clients that were seeking the same outcome. It's such an individual journey, and it creates a foundation for this really useful, purposeful path to unfold before the client in such a way that whatever is most important to that individual is going to be achieved in a transformational way, in a sustained way, in an embodied way, so that everybody wins, right? That their workplace wins because whatever was important to them will almost always result in like improved focus and productivity and better relationships, and their families benefit and their loved ones benefit across the board. Um, it's I describe it as the most perfect thing I've ever found, and I'm serious about that. Yeah, it's just I'm gushing about it, I realize, and I often do, but it's just so well conceived and so complete. And as I grow as a coach, it just continues to open in front of me. It's not like it's not like the Truman Show where you get to kind of the end of it and knock on the wall and you're like, oh, here it is. We've discovered it all, right? It's still ever expanding. And I will say I have a bit of a habit, personal habit of learning things and then explaining to everybody why they're wrong. Right? That's kind of my history. The example I use is that I'd been flying helicopters at ships for about 2 years before I explained to the United States Navy that they're flying helicopters at ships wrong. And they are, like I was right. But the point is like this need to point out how things are wrong. And I have yet to find the thing with integral coaching that could be better because it's all just there. And I have friends, other coaches or just close friends that frequently send me books. Oh, you got to read this one. You got to read this. And it'll be something about coaching or leadership. And I'll read it and I'm grateful for the book but my response is almost always, well, yeah, right. That's already something that I incorporate in this system that's been offered to me.
It's not a big surprise to me that that works. Like this individualized approach to leadership works. I when you were talking about it, I started thinking about, we're talking about individualized medicine as better, right? Like thinking about um, individualized nutrition, right? We want to make sure we're optimizing people's diets for them and not this broad spectrum of, hey, this is what you need to have because everybody is different. So thinking about like how people learn and what motivates them, and that being just as individual as every other aspect of a human, like totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, you picked up on that really well, Anthony. You nailed that. Like this is a coaching methodology that allows me or another integral coach to meet somebody exactly where they are in their journey and honor the complexity of that human and to really listen and hear what's most important to them. What is it that they long for in their journey? And to really support them in that. But yeah, 7 steps to leadership acumen just don't work for me, right? Like it's about and I believe that leaders are built from the inside out. So really connecting with that individual and unveiling a truth and a deeper belief system and illuminating it and then building over the top of it new belief systems that allow them to have more choice in how they show up in life and to create more impact. It starts from the inside out and it starts with them.
That's really, really good insight. So I want to ask you now, what's the future look like for you? What are your goals like? How can we and the listeners help you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The future has started feeling a little shaky for me recently, in the sense that I told you when I discovered integral coaching about 6 years ago. I'm like, oh, this is it. I want to be an integral coach for the rest of my life. And that's still true. Like, I will do this for as long as I can. I truly believe that. Um, and I typically have 20 to 24 clients a year. Um, and I believe that I support each of them in transforming their lives in an important way. But that's still only 20 to 24 people a year, and that's where I'm starting to feel shaky, and that's what I'm starting to struggle with. Like, I believe that we as a species, or we'll just kind of keep it maybe to our own US society, just to kind of put a boundary around that. I feel that we have inherited an understanding of leadership that's centuries old, right? This is what leadership is. And in many ways, that has served our society, and largely quality of life has increased over those centuries. But I also think that understanding of leadership that we've inherited is limited. It's not complete. It's not full. It doesn't incorporate, I think, critical moral aspects around stewardship and service and love and other important things that for me are part of leadership. And and with that limitation of our understanding of leadership have come some really sticky challenges, or if I'm phrasing it euphemistically, opportunities for our society to address, for our species to address around technology. Like AI is, the impact of AI is here, and its further role is imminent. But I don't think we have a clear sense of what that means for us socially, personally, humanly, economically, politically. I don't think that our leadership has expanded enough to address that. And stewardship of our resources in this if I can get woo woo on you, this beautiful planet that I feel so fortunate to be a part of, um, and its systems. Like we haven't these are things that I believe have to be addressed with a new understanding of leadership. So my passion is raising our collective leadership capacity, our collective ability to address these things in a meaningful way that transcends how we've historically thought about leadership and how we've historically collectively addressed these things. Um, and so how do I do that at 20 to 24 clients a year? I probably can't. So I engage at the university. I teach a leadership class in the falls. And now I used to do it every semester. It was a bit much. So now every fall I teach a leadership class and support young people in their leadership journeys. Same philosophy, meet them where they are, um, and do my best to serve them in their exploration and understanding of leadership. I founded and co-direct a leadership coaching program at the university, and it offers professional certified leadership coaches to students free of charge at CU for 10 hours of coaching per semester. In this school year, we will coach approximately 65 students that wouldn't have received leadership coaching otherwise. And what I'm learning from this experience is that young people are so ready for coaching. Young people I, I are so open to possibilities, and their neurological pathways are so much more available. I love my 40 and 50-year-old executive clients. I think they're amazing and they create impact. I love working with them. And young people are so coachable. They're so uniquely coachable and they just get there. And I think about when we coach young people, it's like investing early financially, right? You get compounded interest over time, you get these returns. You've all seen the graph. Just got to do it earlier. I think the same thing can be said about leadership development of young people. If we invest, because right now we spend our leadership development dollars as organizations, businesses, society on the 40 and 50-year-olds. But if we're spending it in the 20s and 30s and just shifted that leadership trajectory a little bit, that return over time isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in impact. And so my new passion is something about how do we invest in young people more fully. So how can your audience help? I would invite anybody in your audience who is um, connected to the resources of a business or a company, connected to the decisions about who gets to be coached in the company. I would invite you to think about investing your coaching dollars in younger people. And it's like, oh, well, I don't know, they're going to leave. Guess what? Senior people leave too. Well, the leadership impact at the higher levels, guess what? People make leadership impact at every level of the organization, right? So, and by the way, if I'm asking something of your audience, it's probably not very polite of me to use that voice to mimic them. That voice wasn't designed to be disrespectful to anybody, but those are that's the feedback that I hear and that I see from nobody in your audience. But if anybody is willing to be coached, and not everybody is, don't coach the unwilling, right? Don't invest in the unwilling. But if somebody's willing to be coached, I would invite you to offer them coaching in your organization um, at any age or any level, right? Don't forget the young people. And if you are a young person, now's the time to invest in yourself and your leadership development. Like if you're on the fence about it, if you're like, man, do I want a new car or do I want a new way of being that allows me to go and create more powerful impact through my life? I'd invite you to think about purchasing that new way of being. I know that coaching's expensive, um, but I think it's a pretty good investment for people of all ages. But young people are so often overlooked. So that's what's next, I think, is finding a way to raise our collective leadership capacity by engaging young people in leadership development in new ways.
It's brilliant.
Thank you so much, Jason and Anthony. It's been a really fun conversation for me, and I'm so honored that you'd be allow me to be a part of this. So thank you again.
Yeah, I had a blast, and I'm really my wheels are turning on what you had said about, how do you give an individualized solution to people at scale, which is like a really tough nut to crack. But you know, as you also mentioned, like AI is becoming a thing, and maybe there are ways that people tell you what they need, and you have content. Like I don't know, like I said, my wheels are spinning. So I just really thank you for planting that thought in my head, and I'm curious to see what comes out.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
All right, thanks, Walt. Be well.
All right, gentlemen.